Bienvenue au Leadership de Croissance podcast, épisode 47. Et maintenant, c'est diffusé sur ma chaîne YouTube. Mélanie Fortin, je vous invite à vous abonner pour ne rien manquer. Aujourd'hui, c'est un épisode spécial parce que je reçois nul autre que Colin Boyd, qui est un conférencier international, coach d'affaires, mentor, pas n'importe quoi, là, en influence, en persuasion et en communication. Colin y a accompagné plusieurs leaders du web, dont Amy Porterfield, James Whitmore, pour ne nommer que ceux-là. Aujourd'hui, là, de quoi qu'on va parler? On va parler d'une chose, mais de plein de choses. Mais la plus importante chose, c'est qu'on va parler de message, de l'importance d'avoir un message inspirant, impactant, qui attire la bonne clientèle pour être en mesure de convertir davantage de clients. Fait que si là, prochainement, tu planifies faire une conférence, que ce soit virtuelle ou en présentiel, ou bien que tu planifies faire un webinaire, cet épisode-là est vraiment pour toi parce que Colin va nous partager ses meilleures pratiques pour aider justement à convertir davantage de clients. Fait que sans plus tarder, j'accueille Colin. So how are you, Colin? I'm so excited to have you here with me at my podcast. How are you?
Bonjour, Melanie. That's about all I've got.
That's okay. I'll take it. That's okay. And people will have subtitles. And just to mention in French, pour ceux et celles qui ne parlent pas en anglais, je vous invite à aller visiter justement l'entrevue sur ma chaîne YouTube où est-ce que vous allez retrouver des sous-titres en français. So thank you. It's a reminding like, oh, if it's in English, what the hell is going on? So you can visit the interview on my website. My YouTube channel. Thank you. And I'm so excited because I can't wait for my audience, my French audience, to discover you, Colin, and especially to learn from you. So I'm so excited to have you here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fantastic, Melanie. I've got to say, when I first met you, I could tell that you were a powerhouse. And
Powerhouse.
I think we talked about you being a lioness, right? That
Indeed. You have a good memory, Colin. I love it.
You bring a strength to what you do that very few women do, and you do it in a really elegant way. And I just think that anyone under your leadership, anyone under your direction, is in good hands. So it's a pleasure to be a part of the podcast.
Thank you.
To have
That's
a conversation today.
So nice. A lioness. I love that because we had a coaching together. It was amazing. And we'll talk about it probably more during the podcast episode because I was amazed. Like, I think within 15, 20 minutes, you got me like, boom, right away. You got it. Like, what was the essence? And because there is like a link with what we're going to talk today, mainly about the signature story or the importance of a signature story. But because my audience doesn't know you a lot, I would like to start about you started as a life coach. I love that part. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, within 5 years, you build a $1 million expert coaching business, which is pretty amazing. What is your secret, Colin?
So I had these big dreams of wanting to do something with my life that was meaningful and wanting to do something with my life that made an impact. And I found life coaching. And life coaching for me, this was 13 years ago. It was really exciting, but I remember sitting at my desk and I was living on the wrong side of the tracks in a 2-bedroom apartment. And I was newly married. I had these hopes and dreams of wanting to do something with my life. But to be honest, I was really unsure, unclear, confused about how to actually grow my business. And at the time, let's just say I had half of a client because the client would sometimes turn up.
Half of a
Yes,
client?
half of a client. Not a whole client. It was like half of a client. So what I mean by that is they would sometimes turn up to the coaching sessions, sometimes pay me, sometimes not. And I'm sitting at my desk realizing that my business, my reality wasn't matching up with what I wanted. But I had no idea how to do it. And I tried different strategies and nothing was really working. And I remember receiving a call from a good friend at the time who I'd met through networking events. And he said to me, he said, Colin, I've got a speaking event coming up. And he said, I can't do it. But he said, would you like to do it? It's a free speaking event. And I said, well, that sounds great. I'd never spoken professionally before. I'd done some presentations at college, but that was about it. And I was freaking out, absolutely petrified. I remember for months coming up to that presentation, I would walk around the block and my wife would basically give me a pep talk of encouragement, of saying, yeah, everything's going to be all right. You're going to go well. Like, I'm just freaking out. I come into the evening, it was an evening presentation, and it was literally a dark and stormy night. And I'm creating all the meanings of, oh my gosh, it's going to go terrible because it's overcast and that must mean that things are bad. Like, I'm just losing the plot in my head. And I come into the presentation, the event organizer, he runs to me. He's like, Colin, this is the biggest presentation night we've ever had. In fact, we've got the biggest turnout. We've got 137 people here live. And for me, this was bad news because in my mind, I just thought, great, I'm going to look like an idiot in front of more people, in the front of the biggest audience they've ever had. And so I mustered up the courage. I did a presentation, and at the end I made an offer, and I didn't realize at the time, but it was an irresistible offer. And out of the 137 people, I had 125 of them give me their personal details to follow up. And out of those 125 people, I ended up signing about 15 full-time, full coaching clients, not half coaching clients. And then 4 days later, I'm standing on the steps of a hotel after doing one of those coaching sessions. And I get a call from a director from HP, from Hewlett-Packard. And he said, hey, loved your presentation. Would you come and speak at our event coming up in the next month or so? I said, let me just check my calendar. I didn't really have much on. But I was like, yeah, I've got it on. And then that ended up having 5,000 people at that event. That was my first paid speaking event.
5,000, like you went from 137 to 5,000. Oh yes. My God. And how was your confidence level?
It was still not high. It was still not high. Let's just say that.
Wow, that's a big jump.
That was the thing that changed my life. And when I looked back, I was like, it was this one presentation. And now with virtual presentations like webinars and virtual events and even like podcasts and things like that, like we didn't have that level of scale back then, or it wasn't really used properly. And now, like, I realized that in one presentation, my whole business changed. And that made me obsessed about why I love speaking and helping people to speak and sell on stages.
Wow. I love it. I didn't know about that that part, especially because this is one of the things I really like about your message, I would say, like, you can turn things around in one presentation. And wow, I love it. And when you talk about like selling from stage, right? It's your company name. I love that name. I'm jealous. I want it. But it's amazing. It's powerful and it's simple at the same time. And it says everything that needs to be said, right? Because for me, how I see it, there's like three main pillars. Like you talk about like the importance of the message, how to take that message. It's kind of like the offer. But for you, it's an offer, right? I love that. Offer. Une offre in French. Offer.
I've got to say, Melanie, I don't know if you know this. I was born in Toronto, in Canada.
No, I didn't know that.
But I'm not French Canadian.
Because you're from Australia, right?
So I grew up in Australia, from Toronto, Canada. So I grew up around a lot of French Canadians and so forth. And then my dad ran the Canadian Yacht Club. The Canadian Yacht Club. And then I grew up in Australia, and then now we live in the US. So yeah, but I've done the round.
Around the globe. I love it. But you kept your accent, that's for sure, from Australia. I love it.
The offer, yes, the offer.
Offer. You talk a lot about that during the coaching. I like it. And when you talk about like the story, the message, the importance of the message, it's one pretty much of the three pillars, the way I see it, about selling from stage, because the offer, the message, is how to deliver it on stage during like a virtual or a conference or a webinar. This is great, but how can you make people buy it? Like the example that you said, how did you come up with, from, okay, I gained confidence, so I signed up a few coaching clients, so it's better than half of a client. And what was the next step from that moment to building, create, I would say, selling from Stage Academy?
Mm. I think for me, I didn't make the connection until several years later.
Hmm.
And because I used various ways to get clients, and I didn't actually make the connection until several years later when what happened was I was actually in a mastermind, and I'm a big believer in being involved in masterminds and things like that.
Oh, yeah, indeed.
In fact, many of the breakthroughs I've had in my life have come through paid masterminds. And I was running my program. In fact, I was teaching productivity. I went from life coaching to teaching productivity, and I was teaching productivity. And what happened was I had a friend in the group say to me, and she was running a 7-figure expert coaching business at the time. And she said, Colin, I don't want to learn productivity from you. She's like, yeah, it's okay. But she goes, I want to learn how do you speak? You speak so effectively, and you don't come across pushy, but your conversion rates are really high. She's like, I want to learn that from you. And I
Ah,
had that was when I had this epiphany of like, wow. So, and to be honest, I felt a level of imposter syndrome around it. Creating Self from Stage Academy was one of the scariest offers that I'd ever made. And I
wow.
think if I'm really honest, the reason why it was so scary was because at the core of who I was, I really felt like this was the one thing I wanted to do for the next decade or longer of my life. And I don't know how long that's going to go for. But I felt like I felt so scared making this offer because for me, selling productivity was like a B plan, and teaching speaking was actually the A plan. But I shied away
Definitely.
from the
Without
A
a
plan.
doubt.
I shied away from it for so many years. And it wasn't until I felt that nudge, it was actually someone else nudging me, that I mustered the courage to create it. And as soon as I launched Self from Stage Academy, it just blew up. And
You never look back, I'm pretty sure, because like for me, productivity, what? I'm
yeah,
like,
isn't that
no,
weird?
it is indeed. But you know
Yeah.
what? It's maybe I can see a connection because you're pretty strong in modeling, doing models, create framework,
Mm,
creating like tools to help people to get more organized, structured with their message, their strategy, and all. So
mm,
I can see the link, but I think productivity, probably it was in you stayed in your comfort zone a little bit,
mm. It felt
but
safe for me. It felt safe for me.
yeah.
And I taught productivity for unorganized people. So it was people who are not naturally structured,
I've
which is
done that
me.
before.
Right? So it's more creative based people. But what
Yeah.
was fascinating was I transitioned my message, and then what happened was that was when I really got obsessed around what the difference was between a presentation that just got claps and got nice comments on a webinar and one that actually got clients. And my hope, my desire is that when your audience use the methods and strategies that we'll talk about today, is that my goal is actually that the audience would move faster towards the offer than you're even sharing the offer. And so what happens is you start getting comments and people saying, can I give you my money? Can I join now? Like, oh, what's your program? And so people actually start wanting your offer before you've even shared it. And that's the whole idea of infusion selling and telling the story that converts and so forth, which we can unpack.
This is amazing. And there is not a lot of people that master that skill, definitely, because that's why a lot of entrepreneurs or web entrepreneurs, coach, and all that are struggling not to get clients, but mostly how to have them say yes to their offer. What would you say the main difference is between like an inspiring presentation
Mm.
and a presentation that converts, like you said? Because probably
Mm.
I think the line is pretty thin, right? Sometimes we
Mm.
think there's a huge gap between both. Is it? Or the line is pretty thin?
I think it's close. I think it's close because I think the first thing that your audience needs to understand is that a presentation that converts is built around this idea that the purpose of the presentation is to move the audience to a more courageous decision in their life. And the reason why people aren't getting results in their life is not because they don't have the how-to. It's actually because they haven't come to a decision of full commitment. And so what happens is when you do a presentation that is very much overload of information, too much content, too much how-to, you essentially overwhelm your listeners and you just give them a whole bunch of things that they think they're going to do, but they're not going to do anyway. And it actually handicaps their progress. And so a presentation that sells is built around the idea that I have to create content that really moves the audience to make a decision around their life and a courageous decision. And it's kind of like this. Melanie, have you ever had your brain picked by someone? Like, I'm sure you have. Like, people say, "Can I pick your brain?"
Definitely.
You've already established your business. You've hit a level of success in your life already, even in your past life, your leadership, and so forth. But the problem is that pretty much everyone you would have met with, you meet with them, you probably buy the coffee for them. You spend the 2 hours with them, you give them everything that you know, and they walk away and you see them like 2 months later and you say, "Oh, how's it all going?" And they're like, "Oh, I haven't really done anything with it." And I think it used to happen to me all the time because they thought they needed more information. They didn't. They needed the right type of information to make a decision. And then when they made a decision, that's when they needed the how-to information. And so think about it like this. What most people do is they provide all the how-to in their presentation, and then they overwhelm the audience before they've made a decision. So they don't make a decision and don't join the program, which is actually the thing that will get them a result. And so your presentation has to be designed to move the audience to make a decision. And then the how-to is the program if the person aligns with it. And this is the thing, is sometimes people get caught up with, "Oh, but I feel bad about selling. I feel bad about,
That's
selling
a
to
biggie.
people." It's a big one, right? And the reason why people feel bad about selling is because they have had previous conditioning or previous experiences of where they've been manipulated or pushed into buying something that they didn't want. And the problem with that is if you bring that mindset into this, it's going to drastically impact your ability to sell. And the way I see selling is purely, it is deeply understanding your audience and communicating in a way where they commit to goals that they have already got. And so for me, I'm about trying to elicit the goals that they have within them and moving them to a place to commit to those goals already. And then I've created a space where they can see a result from that, which is the offer. I feel very integrate with that. And so like we just need to shift our view of selling as well.
That's amazing. And you're right about, usually it's about like there's a mindset shift that people needs to do. I hear that so many times, like they feel uncomfortable, they have this imposter syndrome, or who am I to charge this? They don't trust themselves. And the way, like, so for people to not feel like they are being pushy or too much insistent, when they propose their offer, do you have an example like of a phrase you could say to direct, the prospect to discover the offer? Do you have like an example, a clear, concrete example that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, with the idea of not being pushy, I still need to say that you do need to make an offer. And so you do need to ask people to take that next step.
Yeah, you cannot avoid it, right? So
you can't avoid it.
To mention it, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
Now that next step could just be booking in a phone call and then having a conversation. Like that's totally fine, especially if you've got a program that's beyond usually about $3,000. If it's above $3,000, you're usually going to book a call. But a phraseology that I like to use is, and these are called transition scripts. one of them is, if you're really serious about insert result that person has. So it could, if you're really serious to learn how to tell a story that connects with your audience and moves them into your programs, then I want to share with you the next steps about how that can work for you. So it's something like that. I want to share with you the next steps, or I want to share with you what that could look like. I would love to invite you to explore this. So you can just use that sort of language, and that's kind of like a nice transition. But I like that angle of like, if you're really serious about this, that's a nice phraseology that you can use.
I like that. And we can see right away, it's not pushy at all. It's just saying what it is. And I like that. And I like what the example with, I can show you the step, what you need, what's the step you need to take to achieve, what you're looking for. Or I really like that. And what about like when you talk about this, let's say the story itself. So you call it like a signature story. So in other words, like it's like developing an inspiring, unique message. And you talk a lot about in the Selling from Stage program, you talk a lot about absolutely having like a main idea. So how come like for you, how come it's so important to have like one big idea and after developing a strong signature story?
Yeah, so that one big idea is, we call it the core premise. And the core premise is the one idea that you need to build your presentation, your story all around. And if you don't have that one idea, you're going to really struggle with your marketing, with your direction. It's kind of like the backbone. You could say it is literally the backbone that holds up the whole body. And the one idea, or the core premise, is essentially a clear sentence that articulates how you get someone a result. And so if we unpack what happened in our podcast interview already, if we press rewind on our podcast interview, I shared a story, and I think you asked me, Melanie, you said, tell me about your story, how you got into this. The story that I shared wasn't like, to be honest, I could share 20 stories. That story that I shared was a very specific story, because that story tells the journey of my experience of using a presentation to get clients. And then at the end, I actually said that for me, I realized that I was one irresistible presentation away from the breakthrough I always wanted in my business.
You're right. That's the one.
And that's my core idea. That's my core premise. And so the idea of having a signature story that converts, which is what I call a conversion story. A conversion story is a story that when you tell it, it enraptures it. It covers the core idea and reinforces the core idea without being too blatant, without being too direct. And what I love about story is that when you tell a story, it doesn't feel like you're selling. It just feels like you're telling a story.
Exactly. That's what I like about it.
Yeah. And that's the power of this type of selling, is that when you sell using what we call infusion selling, and conversion stories, signature stories are part of that, is that when you tell a story, the listener's mind actually goes unconscious, like the conscious mind shuts off. And what happens is the audience starts putting themselves in your story. And so rather than hearing your story, like they're verbally hearing your story, but they're actually hearing their own story through your story. And when that happens, all of a sudden they go on the journey that you've been on towards breakthrough, and they start to go, wow, I wonder if, they start to think, I've had those sort of problems before. I've had those I've got those desires to grow my business or to get clients. And when they start to do that, then they start to go, well, maybe I could follow the same sort of pathway that person's been on. And so all of a sudden your story is their story. And when you do that, you're actually selling, but it's not in a way that feels like you're pushing them to do something, if that makes sense.
because people can relate automatically. And I love that. And that's the
Yes.
key. And do you have like, because for me, hearing your core promise or your main story, I would say, it's like, wow, if I think about some of my stories, let's say, for example, I have a few, but which one stands on top of all the other stories? Do you have like maybe a way or a trick that can help me to find out, which story is the main one?
I think one of the good places to start is, when was the first time you experienced a breakthrough based on what you help people with? And so that's a good place to start. And now that
I just have my
main,
answer now. That's so funny. I love
yeah,
that. No, this is very important. And guys, if you're listening right, this is like, wow, you're right. The breakthrough. I added, and it's
yeah,
from what we have been discussing during the call about the magnetic. It's a challenge to pronounce magnetic selling method. Something
yes,
happened during that event that probably will change a little bit the course of what I'm
mm,
doing. I'll let you know more about it, but
that's great.
this is great. This is
And it will
great.
evolve. That's exactly right. Like, as you teach it more, as you teach your content, your content evolves. It's just an evolutionary process. And so, but your conversion story is usually the story of when you experience, not when you had the revelation of it necessarily, because for me, I didn't have the revelation until 7 years later, when someone told me that that's what they wanted to learn from me.
7 years. Wow.
7 years, right? I'm a late bloomer. I'm pretty slow. I'm pretty slow. I'm pretty simple. So, I look back and I was like, wow, that it was actually that presentation. Now, what the reason why I say the first time is because where do you think your clients are, or your audience is? Your audience is right before their first time. And so you have to tell a story where they go, well, that's kind of where I'm at. They will usually say, I haven't experienced that like that before. And so when you tell a story, you're joining their story of where they're at. That's why it's good to tell the first experience that you had of this breakthrough. Now, you can also unpack a whole bunch of other things. And for me, sometimes when I tell a longer version of that story, I'll go into the first time I ran a webinar, and then the breakthrough I had with that, and then virtual events. And I can unpack that, and then I can talk about the speakers that I coach and the experts, etc. So I can build more credibility into it. But the most important thing is that I've talked about a transformational experience that happened the first time, because that's where the audience is at. And when you do that, the audience will put themselves in your story, and then they're going to be more inclined to want to learn from you and do the journey with you.
Hey, that's interesting. That's a detail I didn't notice earlier. So when it comes to, okay, which story, which breakthrough story I'm going to choose, I need to think about my audience. So let's say for that presentation, I need to think about, if I understood correctly, okay, they are at that level
Yeah.
of their business. That's very interesting
Yeah. It's,
because
where are they at? Where are they at?
exactly, so they can relate
Yes.
easier, right? I
Mm.
love it because I'm working with my clients. Like, let's say we are talking about histoire à déclic. It's like breakthrough stories,
Yep.
and usually there's a few. We'll choose like between 3 and 5, and we'll extract, what is the main information that will connect with people. But like, this is good because I think we didn't think about, okay, what about your audience for that specific
Mm.
presentation? And but for me, I think one of the phrase that I really loved in selling from stage, you're maybe, or you are at you're one presentation away from the breakthrough you're looking for.
That's exactly right.
Oh my God, this connect to your story and connect to where you want to bring people. This is pretty strong when you have a
Yeah.
phrase like that, because I can relate and it's inspiring. I had like half a client, boom, I haven't had an opportunity, a life-changing opportunity
Mm.
in front of 5,000 people. Oh, I realized I can do this. You never looked back. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and that
It's going to be
phrase,
hard to beat as a story.
that phrase is my core premise. That's my core idea.
Yeah,
And so for me in our business, if I can get an audience member to believe that idea, which it is true,
that's
but
what
there's
I was
also,
going to say. It is true because
it
you
is
did it.
true. 100%. It
Exactly.
is true. And we see it happen over and over again with people. But the audience doesn't necessarily believe it until you've done enough reinforcement around it. You've actually built the whole body. You've given them the backbone, but you've put the flesh on, you put all the different rib cages, and that's like all the other things that you teach, because there's so much more to it than just telling the story. Like the story is I think the story is one of the cornerstones of it. And the good thing about a story is that you can use it on a podcast. You can use it on a
Yeah,
on a
exactly.
Facebook Live, on an Instagram Live, on a email. Like the story is one of the cornerstones of knowing how to sell effectively.
Do you have like a small framework that maybe how to deliver or how to say our
Yeah.
story? Do you have like a few steps that so it can help the audience, to see, oh, this is like nice, this is easy to, it's the word I'm looking, raconter son
Yeah.
histoire. You know what I mean? So do
Yeah.
you
The
have like a little
process.
framework that you can share with us?
Yeah. So there's usually 3 phases that a conversion story runs through. The first phase is the connection phase. And the connection phase is where you unpack a situation, a circumstance in your life of where you were vulnerable, you were struggling, you were experiencing an internal tension of having a desire to want to make a difference, a desire to grow, but your reality was not matching up with it. And when you enter that situation in your story, your audience will put themselves in that situation. They're not physically there, and they may have different versions of it. But as long as you describe it internally, the internal tension that was happening in you, then the audience will go, "Oh, that's kind of like me. I've experienced that before." So that's like the first phase. The second phase is the credibility phase. And so we could say that in between these 2 phases is that journey. So we got the connection phase, which is starting out with challenge. Then you usually come to a point of decision where you say, enough's enough. I need to make a difference. I need to change. I need to get above my fears. You make a decision, and then you do something. And that doing something is usually the thing that you help people with. So for me, it was I help people speak and present. And so I did something, and then I got a breakthrough. Now you can also unpack a few more breakthroughs after that as well. You could tell a little bit more of that journey and the breakthroughs you had. But really that's about building credibility. So there's like the first 2 tensions is you have to build enough connection with the audience where the audience says, Melanie's like me. Even though she's up
Mm.
here, she's a legend, she's exceptional. She she
Legend.
she didn't start out like that. She started out kind of like me.
Mm.
So that's the connection piece. Then you tell them the journey that you went on towards the credibility, the breakthrough, the lessons, and you can share that. And it's specifically through the mechanism that you help people with. And that answers the question, not just, is Melanie like me? It answers the question, Melanie can also lead me.
Mm.
So the
I
second
like
question
that.
is can you lead me? There's two core questions at the start, which is, are you like me? And the second question is, can you lead me? And if you take that journey, that will answer those first 2 questions. And then the third phase, which is what most people miss, is the core premise or the epiphany. And the epiphany is where you clearly articulate the vehicle or the core idea that reinforces your story. And so for me, it is, I say it like this, I'll say, I had this revelation that I was just one presentation away from the breakthrough I'd always been wanting in my business. And
Mm.
that was my revelation. But that actually is the core premise of our whole business. If you distill our whole business down to one sentence, it's that sentence.
And I can see like it's probably so easier to do all your content for your social media, your webinars, your launches. I mean, okay, everything starts from there. It's
Yes.
still it's not easy to do, but and why do you think, like, because when I talk with entrepreneurs, colleagues, friends, let's say we talk about the messaging, the story, and I think would you agree that the majority of the people underestimate how important the message and the story is to be able to convert? I think people don't realize it's like so connected, and why people are struggling. Okay, I have a great offer, a super message, or I have everything in place, a great funnel, a great webinar and everything, but a lot of them are they can't convert enough. I think they underestimate the how, how the message is so important in the process to
Yeah. Well, I
convert.
think the mistake that most people make is they misunderstand the trust process and
Hmm.
the alignment of trust with the offer. And so what
Hmm.
happens is
Interesting.
people tell stories, they tell experiences, etc. They are vulnerable, they share their vulnerable moments. But if you're not consciously aligning those moments to your offer, and you don't even have to make an offer yet, like you don't even have to say what your program is or anything like that. But if you're not consciously aligning them when it comes to making your offer, you're going to have a lot lower conversion rate because you haven't, you, even if you build trust, if you don't move that trust consciously, it's like you kind of funnel it down towards a belief, a specific belief structure. And when you push it down that belief, when I say belief structure, I mean specifically like the core premise or the core idea or some core beliefs that the audience has to believe to say yes to the offer. If you don't push, if your content doesn't reinforce that, there will be a disconnect when you make your offer, and it will impact negatively on conversions immensely, because people, even though they trust you, they haven't built that desire to want to get the outcome that your offer
Yeah.
has. And that's what happens. Like, you've seen those people where they've got huge followers, like millions of followers, and then they make an offer to their audience and they sell like very few, because there wasn't a connection from the offer to how they were building trust. And so you have to be very conscious in how you build trust with your messaging towards your offer. And if you do that, you create this like slipstream that happens. And then that's when you start to get momentum.
That's very powerful. I agree with you about the trust process. And I think this definitely, and I think, do you think that people, oh, building trust with my audience, oh my God, it's going to take so much time. I don't have that time. People think that it
No,
will take
it
so
doesn't.
many times. It doesn't, right?
No. I mean, I look at our stats, even from a data perspective,
Yeah.
some of the last, promotions that we've ran, most of the time, 80% of people who join our program found out about me a week prior, a week or two prior.
That's a good example. It
So
says it all. Like,
yeah, it really does. Like, you can do it really quickly. Like, you can do it in 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You can build trust to make an offer for a couple of $1,000, pretty quickly. Yeah.
I can confirm that you definitely master the story, because and in Sell from Stage, you just finished launching Sell from Stage, right?
Yeah.
So, and I am in a Sell from Stage, and it's amazing. Like, everything that you put inside definitely shows, like, show you like every step you need to take to be able to start like with a strong message. Everything that you talk about, it's
Yeah.
there. It's very powerful. I like
Mm.
the trusting part, because people think that it takes so many times, but it doesn't. So make sure to align your core promise, your message, and everything. I love it. I'm going to do a small French introduction at the end. And you have like, and also in I think it's from that Selling from Stage program, you have like the conversion story. Can you tell us more about it? Because I
Yeah.
really want my audience to discover the conversion story framework tool that you have.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've resonated with what we've talked about today and this idea of the conversion story, it's kind of the simplest place to start for people because building an entire presentation can take some time. It's got some complexities, but I think one of the most powerful and easiest places to start is your story. And when you get your story right, then you can use it in so many different ways. And so I created this thing called the conversion story formula, and it's pretty simple. Like basically my goal is to help people to create a conversion story within 48 hours. So
48 hours. Wow.
48 hours, within 48 hours, they will have their conversion story. That's the goal of it. And so it's just like the simplest, easiest next step for people to really like dip their toe in and go, wow, what does that look like? And if they're really serious about learning how to do that and learning how to align their story with their offer, and there's even some strategies in there around like aligning it with your offer and transitioning to your offer. There's a whole bunch of things in there which is really helpful. So I know that you've got a link that you'll give your audience.
Yeah,
Is that right, Melanie?
definitely. I'm going to explain in French at the end of the episode of a podcast. But this is great. I didn't know about the 48 hours part because
Mm,
and again, it's probably like people think, oh my God, developing a conversion story is going to take me like weeks and months.
mm.
And so with your formula, it can take only 48 hours. This is
Yeah, and
amazing.
people struggle with this for like 2 decades. You know,
2
I'm like,
decades
let's
indeed.
do it. Let's get it clear in 2 days. Like, and I'm not saying 2 days of full time. I'm talking like 2 or 3 hours max. You know, and you're going to have it completely done, ready.
This is amazing. I love
Yeah.
it. It's very inspiring because there's so many things we can talk, and it's good for me. I'm rusty a bit. It's been a while since I practiced my English, so I was up to the challenge. I understand everything, but it's so funny. You're so nice, and it's very inspiring, and to especially to see like your journey, where you start and where you are within the last few years. And your core promise for me really spoke to me, and I know uh, how much your formula, tools, strategy can help entrepreneurs to clarify their message, their story, and how to be more confident, on stage or during a webinar. And the objective is not to impact or just to inspire, it's to convert, huh? It's important
Yeah.
to sell without being pushy. And lastly, you shared a lot of great stuff so far today, but let's say at last, would you have like one or two step or best practice that you can share with my listeners that they can put in place right away? But one of them is the conversion story that you guys will be able to find the link under the episode. But would you have like another takeaway you would like to share, Colin, with my listeners?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I mean, the conversion story is a great place to start. I definitely think you should start there. Another thing, one other practical thing that I want people to think about is that if they feel uncomfortable selling and they feel uncomfortable making an offer, is this shift of seeing that selling is the doorway through which you can serve people on a greater level. And
Serving instead of
yeah,
being pushy. I love
that
that.
selling is serving. And what I mean by that is, for example, Melanie, I know you've worked with me, you've done some work with me. The level of service and transformation I can provide you is 50 times, 1,000 times higher than if you were just randomly consuming free content from me. Wouldn't you agree?
Definitely.
And so and I think about the integrity of that when and I want your listeners to think about it for your audience, and for you, if you guys are working with Melanie, think about it like that, of that if you make an offer, it provides the client and you, the provider, the opportunity to serve on just a whole nother level. And free content is part of the process. It really is. Like, it actually is like it's like the dating process, right? You're not married yet, but it's
The dating process.
it's the
I
dating
like
process,
that.
right?
And more today because there's so many different offers on the market right now.
Yeah.
So definitely.
Yeah, there's lots. So you got to date and you got to see, if you like it, but if you resonate with the person and you can see that they're integrate, you can see that they're providing value and they're providing an outcome that you want, when you commit to it and you join their offer, there's a level of commitment and service that comes with that. And you're going to see a result in people's lives far beyond if you didn't make an offer. And so that's like a bit of a pep talk for people of if they feel uncomfortable selling, I want you to see it as serving, like from the sense of you're really just opening a doorway and saying, would you like to enter this next space of where I can serve you on a greater level? And if you would, then, there are commitment currencies. There is money, there is time, there is energy, there is effort. There's all different currencies, but all those currencies are just motivating factors for the client to want to work harder, to get better results. And in fact, we know from a lot of studies that if someone pays more for something, they're actually going to get a better result, even if the process doesn't change.
That's so true. That's
Yeah.
so effing true.
Yeah.
Right? And we have proof of that. And one last thing, people are so afraid to give like free content. They shouldn't, because like you were mentioning earlier about credibility, we talked about like the trust, gaining trust, and it's so important. And I like the way that the smooth transition that you talk about, like, okay, if you're serious and you want to go further and this and that, it's really smooth, so people will feel comfortable, they will feel well about that. I love it. And I'm going to finish in French. Hang in there. Just to mention to my audience, but Colin, it was a pleasure having you, right, at my podcast.
Receiving
me.
I can be received. That's fine. Receiving me. And I've got to say, if anyone's on Instagram, come and connect with me on Instagram. I'm just at Colin Boyd. If you guys want to connect with me there, I'm pretty active on there. So,
and I like your break dance. By the way, your break dance was awesome. Et fait que pour tout le monde, j'espère que vous avez aimé le podcast avec Colin Boyd, que vous soyez à travers le podcast ou sur YouTube. Je vous invite à découvrir le podcast de Colin, les Expert Edge Podcast. Il y a du contenu incroyable. Je vous invite surtout à découvrir le lien, le Conversion Story. Fait que français-anglais, c'est pareil. Puis moi, ce que je retiens, c'est qu'en 48 heures, 48 hours, that like caught my attention. Il vous offre la possibilité de développer votre histoire pour vous aider à convertir en 48 heures. Fait que vous allez découvrir le lien qui est là. Puis vous pouvez, comme Colin vient de mentionner, de le découvrir à travers Instagram. Puis vous allez voir qu'il fait du breakdance aussi. Il fait des reels où il fait du breakdance. J'ai vraiment aimé celui-là. I loved when you did breakdance on one of your reels. That was funny.
An ad. I think that was an ad.
Yeah, it is.
That was an ad.
It's an ad, right? Oh, I laughed like, oh my God, that was amazing. Yeah. Fait que c'est bon, il n'a pas peur de sortir de sa zone de confort. Fait que j'espère que vous avez aimé ça, la gang. Vous allez pouvoir découvrir toutes les informations sur Colin en dessous du descriptif de l'épisode. Et on se voit la semaine prochaine pour un prochain épisode. Merci beaucoup tout le monde et à bientôt!